So this is a different kind of video. I realize this is a topic that is not going to get a lot of clicks. It's not going to get a lot of traction. It's not going to go viral, but it's an important conversation that we need to have about a subject that impacts all of us in the photography community. We need to be better. This is something that impacts YouTubers. It impacts all the photography websites and news feeds that we love and enjoy, and it affects you as a viewer. We all are in this together, and we need to be doing a better job. I realize that your time is valuable, and if you're watching this on YouTube, click on the description below. I've taken the liberty to go ahead and index the entire video. I realize it's kind of long. If there's a topic that you want to jump to in a specific moment, it is listed there. And of course, conversation is encouraged, so please feel free to agree or disagree with anything that you're hearing us talk about. So now that I've set this up, on with the conversation. This is a special video presentation. I've got my friend Jaron Schneider. It's this guy. We have an important topic that we want to talk about today that deals essentially with ethics in the photography niche in our line of work. And we're talking about stuff that is now sort of seen as quote-unquote journalism. So YouTube certainly has an influence. As a YouTuber, you have people who watch you. There's podcasting. There's also websites. There's, if you have a blog, there is, it's kind of this new wave of journalism where you have an audience that watches what you say. And there was a specific event this last week where a story was posted about Steve McCurry's Afghan girl. And we wanted to address that a little bit. And the way this kind of came about is I've done 2 videos on Afghan girl, and it's been a while, like almost a year, right? And all of a sudden I'm getting all these comments, and people are like, if you really know the truth, you're covering up. And I'm like, what is going on? And then I realized that someone else had posted a video essentially making an accusation of something that may have been an abuse of power that went on. The video is no longer posted. But it was kind of interesting because I did go watch that video, and this is where our topic kind of comes from, because there was an accusation and a point of view that was trying to come across in that video that was really not backed up by sources. It was more or less an opinion or an assumption presented as a fact. Am I getting this straight, Jaron?
Yeah, this is, and also what's important to note here is this is just the latest symptom of a series of issues over the past. Like, this is not the only reason that we're talking about this. It's because it's happened multiple times, and it's just like you kind of ignored it and dusted off. But this is sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back sort of thing. Like,
yeah, sure.
This is a subject that talks about this specific video, but it is not the one that is like, this is the only reason we're talking about it. There's a lot more that goes on, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not the only time this has happened with a specific source.
I think when you and I started talking about it, I mean, we realized that this is part of a much, much bigger picture. I mean, there's been, and not just YouTube, there's been different platforms that will basically present something, and I get it because I do this for a living, and part of the problem is that there's a lot of competition with anything. So if you go to a news feed, or if you go on YouTube to the homepage, there's a lot of thumbnails. You have a lot of options of things you can watch. And so creators that want to get views, because that is the goal, whether you write or make videos or whatever it is that you're doing. So you see this in mainstream news too, where an article is about a certain thing, but the title is dolled up a little bit to,
and the thumbnail takes advantage of it as well.
Absolutely.
Like, and that's playing the game. But then
there's a third topic about that, though, and that is actually the content. So if you're doing a video on just 2 dudes playing tennis, and you can title that and thumbnail it as much as you want, it's not an interesting topic to a lot of people. So people will pick controversy as a means to have something to say as well. And I think that is a bigger problem that really any product by Google, whether it's search or YouTube or what have you, it comes into play, because then we know that controversy gets clicks, and so let's feed this beast a little bit, is the way I see it.
What I'd like to do is take a step back and look at investigative journalism in general, and also state, like, if for anyone watching or listening, why I would have an opinion on this at all, like why what makes me any type of expert on the matter. It's because I have personally written 3 investigative journalist pieces. I know what goes into it. In addition to that, I read investigative journalism. Like, I enjoy the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they do great work there. Something I do want to point out real quick, though, is when I say that, very few will actually know the name or names, often it's many people, of the people who write these big blockbuster pieces, the people who exposed Watergate, for example. Very few people know those people's names. They only know the Washington Post, the New York Times, because being an investigative journalist and talking about true matters is not about making yourself into a superstar. It's never been about that. It's about seeking truth. So if that's not the main goal from the get-go, and you can sense that, then it should be part of you should be asking, why was this piece made? If it's not about finding the truth, is it about setting a specific story that they want to tell, or is it about actually finding true stories? That's something that there's so much stuff to talk
ego
about this.
becomes involved, and that shouldn't be the drive for. Yeah. Right. Gotcha.
So anyway, I've written 3 pieces. I'm going to briefly say what they are. One of them, I'm sure almost all of you saw this because this thing blew up. A while ago, maybe 3 years. Was it the Veritasium video, Ted? That was a while
probably
ago,
been.
right?
Yeah, it's probably been a good 3 years now. But,
so Veritasium released a video which talked about how bots hide themselves by trying to appear real on Facebook by liking topics, a vast range of topics, so that they can then use that bot to then follow specific pages and hide better. Veritasium made that video and it went viral. That video was based entirely on an expose that I wrote for The Next Web, and he does reference it like very quickly one time, but I just that was my story, and I'm really glad people watched his video because that's the story got out. I am not hurt that I did not necessarily get all the fame from it because it's not about that. It's about the truth.
Yeah.
The other 2 stories I've written, I wrote one on how F-Stop Gear basically defrauded all of their customers by faking a product and putting it on Kickstarter, or I think it may have been Indiegogo, and then with no intention of ever making that product. And I wrote about that. And then the most recent one I have was about a photographer named Sal Sincata who entered and won his own portrait competition, and basically the ethics behind something like that. So all of those pieces that I just referenced, all of them took minimum a month to put together, to research, to go and find more information, and to vet my own sources.
Minimum month, probably longer.
Minimum month. So that's the part I want to focus on to start with, is vetting sources. When it comes to a real investigative journalist, it's their job to hear a story from a source, and they may or may not believe that story, but if it sounds credible, it is up to them to then go and find out if it is. And that requires hearing what the story is, and this may seem like a huge deal, but not jumping in feet first and trying to go out and prove that thesis immediately. You have to go out and find out if it happened. And this is there's some examples in modern journalism where this has happened, where someone has tried to fool, for example, the New York Times, and get them to publish a story that is made up, and they find out. And the reason is because they don't jump on the story and publish as fast as they can. They try and figure out if it actually happened because they want to get it right. It's about truth, not about clicks.
So I think, just to put this into a context where people might understand what you're talking about, like Watergate obviously is the famous one. And in Watergate, you have this character, Deep Throat, who just refers to himself as he's an anonymous source. And so what you're talking about is you hear something from a source, and then your responsibility is to actually go make sure that's legitimate and not somebody just BSing it, right?
Right, because sometimes you only get one source. Yeah. And when you only have one source and you can't cross-check him with another source, you have to find other ways to see if it's true. And that's what takes real work. It takes legwork. You have to do actual, God forbid, research.
You also have to care that it's true. You know what I mean? It's like you care about the story to the extent where I have something to prove here, and something has to back me up, because that's the difference of saying this is my opinion or my gut feeling, or you have to have that. It legitimizes what it is that you're
right.
writing.
A lot of these investigative journalists who do this don't come up with this idea of a story they want to write and then try and find the facts to back it.
Right.
For the most part, these stories appear in front of them as possibilities. They have this giant board of these are the things we're hearing from individual sources or whatever, and we are interested in trying to see which one of these are true, rather than, man, that Steve McCurry guy sitting up there too tall on his horse. What can I do to pull him down? Like that sort of thing. Right. Like that. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's not the mentality you go into.
In this case, but there has been a lot of that, in particular with Steve McCurry. And I want to defend Steve McCurry for just a second, because he's, first of all, the Afghan girl is, and I'm not I'm just giving you facts here. The Afghan girl is it is one of the top 3 most iconic photographs ever made. That image has been reproduced. As Graciela Turbide says, it has wings of its own. It flies beyond the realm of just the magazine and the photographer. And there's a number of reasons why that could be. It's the viewer's interpretation of what the eyes mean, of what, put a face on a refugee in the 80s to Western culture that hadn't normally seen that. In fairness, National Geographic is not a news source necessarily. The photography, and they've always been known for photography in that magazine, but it is not trying to call it journalism, I think, is a little bit of a stretch. And when people,
slightly, yeah.
When people
it's more journalism than it's not. It's not like a tourist photo, but it's not. Right. And it's not hard journalism either.
No, Steve McCurry, and they're hard photos to get. I mean, like the flood pictures that he's famous for. I mean, jumping in water with leeches and stuff. It's difficult to get those photographs. Steve McCurry has a great eye. He's done some amazing work. A couple of years ago, there was one of the big websites did this investigative reporting on the fact that he photoshopped some images that were on his website because you could find the Photoshop errors. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, those were not published under the guise of photojournalism. Those were work that he was preparing for gallery work. And I know that does create controversy, and that's enough to make you want to post an article to get clicks. But at that point, I think it became very trendy to start dragging Steve McCurry through the mud. So anything with Steve McCurry is controversial, going to get views.
And these days now, like those who don't know the full story, like you just stated,
sure,
can now go back and be like, oh, well, it makes sense that he would have done something like this because in the past we've already proven he's some kind of a liar because he'll Photoshop.
Yeah.
So like it builds on itself when you have these types of stories that the truth is not fully revealed. So
Absolutely.
Whether or not you like Steve McCurry as a person is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's about the story.
I've never met him, so I don't know. I mean, I know people who know him, speak very highly of him. I respect his work and the work that he's done. And like I said, I did 2 videos on Afghan Girl. It's an incredible photograph. It's legendary, Right. I'm not going to dispute that. And so why not use that as an example? In context, I was talking about the intention of a photographer in those videos. And in terms of composition, color, end result, and what the vision of a photographer is going into that. Now, I wouldn't do that with somebody who's a hardcore photojournalist, even though most hardcore photojournalists still have kind of a style they shoot in. There's a look. That's composition. That's photography. I don't think you're ever going to get a solid version of photojournalist photography. To some extent, I mean, you can find examples of things that really were misleading, but it's not an iPhone snapping an image just randomly. It's somebody who's taking care of that and who's a good photographer. And so there is going to be some level of interpretation that goes into anything. I'm off topic already. It didn't take me long. But anyway.
So to kind of lead this back, so we're not necessarily here going to just talk about this one instance but I am going to lead off of it in a way that might make a little bit more sense. So when we start talking about sourcing and when we start talking about doing real journalism, sources are important. And in this particular case, I wasted half a day where I went and I read every source that was
in fairness,
given.
I did too, because it was a strong accusation that was made. And it was like, wait a minute, is this onto something? This. Yeah, and it's from somebody that I would do that.
He's
with.
He's in a position where and in a position to give information. He's he's a thought leader
to a lot of people. And by the way, every website picked that up. Every one of them. I'm going to come back to that later, but go ahead.
Yeah. So
it got seen.
Here is where I think there's fault on both sides. One, there's fault on the sourcer or the giver of sources, which was the YouTube video, and those who watch the YouTube video. Now the responsibility is on both of those people. So the sources were given. So if you went to the video,
they were listed.
Yes, as of yesterday, it was still on Facebook, and they were still there. And I did it again. I actually went back and made sure I watched all of them. He has links to programs put on by the National Geographic channel. So there's like a whole documentary. There's an interview done by the BBC. There's 2 articles from National Geographic itself. And then there's like an Oprah interview and then 1 or 2 other things. Anyway, I watched and read them all. Most of these I had seen before. And when I'm looking at these and actually vetting the source as the viewer, because I want to see where this stuff was said, I could not find any place that backed up a majority of the accusations that he stated. And when you say that this is my source and this is what I took from my source, you got to have like, where's your quotes, your bibliography? Like, let's go here. This exact section is from this exact thing. This is how I know this. And I could not find that anywhere. And that to me is a problem with the person presenting the sources. It's also a problem for those who absorb the final information, because I guarantee you most of the people who watched that video did not check the sources. And so that's on us as the viewership, who is now either defending or not defending the YouTube video. It's on us because we didn't check. We just believed the thought leader rather than checking the sources. And sourcing is so important in a story like this when you're taking on someone or something big. That always is the case. You have to have backed up sources or your credibility is completely gone. Or it used to be, at least. It used to be that your credibility was gone. And I just, this was a case of that for me.
So just to kind of like reiterate what the accusation here is that the accusation that was made against McCurry is that during the shot of the Afghan girl, which was 1984-ish, is that he abused a position of power being a white guy with a child who was an Afghan refugee, is in essence what it is. And that is a very strong accusation to make, for one, and I can see possibly where somebody might make the assumption, but I just wanted to clarify that that's what was being made. But in going through the sources to see if there was anything that backed that up, there was zero. In fact, usually the opposite was given, or something that would suggest the opposite. So anyway, my point is I wasn't there. This person wasn't there. You weren't there. If you're watching this, you weren't there. So nobody really knows what's going on. But to make an accusation like that, and it's a really strong accusation to make, especially if it's going to be an assumption.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with making that type of accusation if you have proper sourcing. Like I would, if this video for me had proper sourcing, and this was like, oh man, he's got like, this is backed up, this is a big deal, then I'm like, I would clap my hands. Like, this is a huge story that has been broken. It's absolutely worth reporting on. And but that I don't feel like that was the case here. And so that sparks another end of this question, or this whole topic, where now we are looking at, okay, so whose responsibility is it to check sources? Well, it's everyone's. But in addition to that, now I want to talk about, because the reason we're even having this conversation is in response to that. And this is not just us who's done it. A lot of people have done this. And this touches on another subject that is worth considering, and it's called peer review. And there is a process right now where if you do a medical study of any sort, let's say you have found that your thesis is that chocolate actually helps put off the instances of a very specific type of cancer. And I'm actually pretty sure that is a study someone has done.
That's true. I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, and so the way this works, if you don't know, is in the medical field, these studies are hard to do because they require money. So you get funding to do whatever study you're working on, and that step right there alone already has a chance to taint your results. Because what if for example, Gatorade wants to do a study on the difference between drinking Gatorade and water, and what if the results of that study show that there is no difference? They don't want that, therefore they'd hush it, or they would try and make it so that it doesn't say necessarily that. So like it depends on where that's coming from. But that aside, it's actually even worse when it comes down to this individual people who are doing these studies wanting to gain fame and acclaim. Because if you come up with something incredible, some crazy, or maybe it doesn't seem crazy, but it's like this, wow, this is a big deal, that gets you attention in the medical field, which leads you to more money, which is exactly what these studies are designed to do, journalistic studies. There
is both incentive and disincentive to, yeah.
So let's say you do a study and then you publish your results and it gets a huge deal. Let's say that, for the sake of this argument, that study only used 10 people, and they only used those 10 people over a 6 to 12 month period, which is not enough. And let's say that it was not double blind. So there's a lot of things in there that are like, okay, maybe we should retest this. That's called peer review. Unfortunately, peer review doesn't bring nearly the accolades or attention that the original statement did. So let's say I go and I disprove this, and I'm like, look, I've disproved that. It's too late. Story's already gone. Nobody cares. Media doesn't care. The whole
cycle's
thing,
over, right?
The cycle is over, and doesn't that sound really familiar to how like news?
Yeah.
News.
Today we call that a hit job, right? Well, that's what it is. It's a hit job piece.
Yeah.
It's
a hit story.
It's in and out, and it's over.
Your tornado of conversation, and by the time anyone's left there to rebuild the city, you've already moved on to another city to tornado down.
Well, and in fact, that kind of annoys me because even us talking about this is almost too late. You know what I mean? It's already done.
The stories, and that's what's frustrating. That's why I wanted to talk about it, because let's say we peer reviewed this, and I think that's what we're doing. We're peer reviewing.
Pretty much,
yeah. We're using the same source material that the original one did. That at least that was said and shown to us as the source material. And you'd think that of the source, because he did also say on Twitter that these aren't all of his sources, just the ones that he remembered, because he wasn't, quote, taking notes. Which, if you're listening to this, you can't see my crazy eyes. But I've got crazy eyes right now, because if you're writing an investigative journalist piece and you're not taking notes and you publish on that, I'm almost shaking right now. Like, I know. What?
Yeah.
Hold on, I need to take a breath because my brain is like firing off, because that right there, like I'm literally shaking right now.
Well, it comes back, and Jaron, I think this is important to say. It comes back to if something unethical did happen, then yeah, we want to know about it. We support that.
Know.
Absolutely. If Steve McCurry go killed a guy, you know what I mean? It's like I'm exaggerating, and maybe this was on the lines of that bad. But it's like,
what's worse is if this story is true.
Yes.
The lack of evidence presented and the way it was presented makes it easy to undercut it. That's the problem. If this story is true, then I want it to be true, and I want there to be sourcing. But I can't know because he didn't take notes.
Well, and what's not fair is that if you're making an accusation, the person being accused, you know what I mean? It's like trial with no jury at this point, and no evidence and no facts, and
exactly, and
no courtroom and no nothing.
In defense of having Steve not be able to respond or didn't respond, I mean, I actually can take that at face value, because personally, I have reached out to people before with regards to, do you want to comment on this story? Mm-hmm. And either they don't respond, or they actively become aggressive, or I've had it go so far as I've had a story killed before, and I can't even talk about it at this point due to threat of litigation, because we weren't able to defend ourselves. Did I have enough evidence to fight this? Oh yeah, I don't go after stories unless I got truth there. But
you didn't have enough money to pony up for a bunch of lawyers.
Correct, because I
worked
for a small blog at the time, and it's just like, we don't have the money to do that. They could kill this in just in the threat of lawsuits. So it's like, okay, well then, whatever. But
well, and some people don't understand that. It's like if you ever get tangled up with a corporation, and they're going to quote unquote sue you for something, they may not have a case, and a judge would laugh it out of court. But the problem is they're going to make you do so much work and spend so much money in legal recourse to back that up. That's another thing about investigative reporting, is sometimes I think an author really has to believe in something to go through all that. You know what I mean? It's a long road.
It's also nice to have the backing of a news organization that has a history of this sort of thing.
Well, and Woodward, I mean, they had that with Watergate, sure, and that's the most
New York Times
example,
and the Washington Post both have very strong standings there.
Sometimes people don't.
You know what? Something else is important about both those organizations. If they make an error, they front page their apologies.
Redaction. Yep.
That's called a redaction. And that's important too. And they don't just delete their story and pretend it didn't happen. They say, this is what we published. This is what was wrong. This is why our opinion has or has not changed. And this is the section that we still think is valid to look into. And here are our sourcings on that. That is how you properly redact. And you know what that does? That doesn't make you a lesser reporter. That makes you a better reporter. That makes people believe you again. Yeah, I've seen, it was very recent actually. The New York Times actually had to say, we made a mistake here. We're sorry. This happens sometimes. And we understand that that's the risk we take when we do this type of work, and we're going to say we're sorry right now. But that's a huge deal. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, as mentioned earlier, this video is not on YouTube anymore. It was just pulled, not redacted.
It is on every photography website I can think of.
Yeah, talk about why you think that's...
Well, that's what I said. Earlier I mentioned, I said I'm going to come back to it. Earlier I mentioned, and I made the point of saying that every website that I'm aware of, I saw that reposted on, right? Mm-hmm. And I think this is what's indicative of a wider spread problem in our business or in our niche of photography. Because as a creator, if I can get, I'm just going to throw names out, f-stoppers, petapixels, somebody to pick up my video, that will result in exposure for me to an audience that may not know who I am. It results hopefully in subscribers and a lot of views. Now, I've had it to where I have a certain type of video featured that's not particularly shocking or anything. It's kind of interesting. People will comment and they, so on and so forth. But if you can shock and make controversy, then what happens is you get all the comments on that website's webpage below the video, and people come back to check comments. So if you can start a fight, you're gold, right? It's kind of, it sorts of acting a little bit like Reddit in that regard, because it becomes a discussion page. Now, what irritates me about it is that the websites that are set up in this fashion, that basically it's a reposting of information. No work went into that at all from that website. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm always grateful to get the feature, but then it's a piece of content that is searchable via Google, etc., where no effort went into it, and the controversy still stays up with no ethical redaction whatsoever from that website. So as far as I'm concerned, even though you didn't write anything in the story, you just featured a YouTube video and then summarized it, what you should do is go back in there and say this video was taken down. We're not sure, at the very minimum, we're not sure why, or close the page. But some kind of redaction is important, even if you're not sure of, and I don't know what the details are of why the video was taken down specifically, and I'm not going to assume that I do.
Right.
That's the business of the person that made the video and any other parties involved. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, if I had a big website that got a lot of views, it is irresponsible to leave that up to continue to get people to view that page. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's like you need to say something.
As someone who's worked for 3 of websites like this in the
one
past,
of them I just mentioned, even.
Yeah, one of them I have. Yeah. I was an editor at F-Stoppers. It did occur to me that it was kind of like easy of like dusting your hands off. It's not your issue. All you did is report that someone else reported. And in the photo industry, this is not the only place that happens. It happens like you'll see someone will report it on New York Times or the Washington Post, and then Business Insider and Slate, and there's a couple others that'll pick up the story afterwards. And they're basically just relying on the fact that the New York Times and the Washington Post got it right. It's not their story. It's a he said, she said sort of thing. Yeah,
so it's an assumption that this is correct. We're reposting it.
Right, and that assumption is based on usually the past excellence in journalism. However, that's because there's huge repercussions if you get that wrong in those industries, like politics or government or economics or whatever. But in photography, and in an area that is now being very much a lot more influencers and YouTubers, no offense, Ted. Or
no, I'm not offended. I think
I'm also
you're
a YouTuber.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. These are folks who did not go to necessarily, not all of them, some of them probably did go to school to learn how to be a journalist, did not learn how to have journalistic ethics, are not tied to those same ethics, and don't care about those ethics. They care about the clicks, the views, and therefore the money that comes out of it. And I'm not making assumptions about anyone. I'm just saying that is the case for people out there who are influencers. And that's the reason it sort of scares me in this industry specifically is I've watched it happen over the last few years, where the major real, quote unquote, real journalist sources, where they are vetting stories, they have an editorial calendar months in advance, they're doing the things like the old school way. Those places do not exist anymore. They are all going out of business because of the I'm going to use the word economics, even though it's not really the economics of YouTube, essentially. The way that we ingest information as people has changed.
You're dead right.
And because of that, we haven't actually taken the standards, the old standards, and applied them to the new methods, new media. So and that leaves us where we are right now.
It's been a classic case of it's still the Wild West. And I told you yesterday when we were talking, I get a little bit tired of people using that as an excuse, the Wild West. Well, it's not television, but it's been around long enough to start maturing. But the biggest problem that we have, and I don't mind being vocal about this at all, is the way it's set up. And I alluded to this earlier, that you have products owned by Google, whether it's search, whether it's video on YouTube. Google owns all of that. It's a massive information, and the way that, let's just use YouTube as the example, the way that YouTube sees it is it doesn't delineate video from video. They're just widgets. What it does is it's going to use data in the way video performs. That's how long people view it, how many times people view it, how many clicks it has, and the velocity of the first hour. There's an enormous amount of data that goes into how YouTube makes a decision that this video is something people want to see. I mean, it gets down on a macro level of behavioral patterns, like you who are watching this, or me, or Jaron, like how our habits on YouTube are. If I watch you've all seen it. If I watch one movie trailer, then YouTube, that's all they're recommending to me, right?
On that note, like, was it yesterday or the day before? Like, because the Afghan thing was a story.
I know.
I hadn't actually watched Ted's video from 8 months ago.
I said to Jaron, we were on the phone, I said, I did a video. I'm getting all these comments. I did a video. And he's like, I've never seen your video on that. I said, oh, it's up there. You can find it.
I opened YouTube and am served his video. So that's why he's probably getting he's getting conversations on old videos, because YouTube is serving them as new content.
Yeah, I don't believe that YouTube is listening to our phone call. I do believe that they saw that you looked it up previously, and that I'd seen it,
and they're like, "Oh, we need to keep him watching. Let's give him another video to watch about this same subject, maybe."
And I think for those of you who either have YouTube channels or who tried to do a YouTube channel, you're going to realize that it's very competitive. It's very difficult. You have to be very patient. It takes a long time, and it's an enormous amount of work. And I don't want to get too far into this, but like a low-end YouTuber, there's no money. For a middle class, which is a lot of YouTubers, like my channel, I would consider to be kind of middle to lower class. I've got 500,000 subscribers, which I'm very proud of, but that also took 10 years to get. I wish I had that many views per video that I put out. It doesn't work that way. But it's very difficult to scrape by on the money that you make doing this. So money does become a driving
huge
thing.
Deal.
Yeah. Because
what can you do to make more money?
Well, and I'm not trying. It's not out of greed or gluttony. It's like, how do I keep the lights on and pay the rent?
Exactly.
And put gas in the car and eat.
Yeah.
That's what I'm worried about, and that's what a lot of us worry about at night. And then we take on a sponsorship with somebody, or so it's strung together through all these things. But there is incentive. But the bottom line is that you want people to watch your video. You need those views if you're going to be successful. So then you have an unethical part that comes in, and I'm not calling anyone unethical necessarily.
Forget about
the Afghan girl video. Just in general, you see this on YouTube. Is then people start making content that is only going to get clicks, and then the quality of that content goes down, and we have this really poor form of edutainment that's barely. There's no edu involved. It's just entertainment. It becomes vapid. It becomes lame. There's no thought put in, and leave everyone out of it. There are people that I know that are fabulous creators, do really good work. They should be viewed. They're doing important work. And the way that algorithm works, it's just stacked up against them until they start doing camera reviews or this. You know what I mean? The system is set up where essentially a robot is curating our content. Another example, if you were interested in a camera, let's say I want to go check out the new Panasonic S1. And so I type that into the Google search. This is not video. This is just Google search. It's going to give me just this indefinite list of websites. Well, you're going to click on one of the first one or two, right? Because you're assuming that Google has curated the best content based on your search, which is, let's be honest, it's impossible to do. Google has an algorithm. They look at backlinks. They look at an enormous amount of data to determine what that order is. But that also makes it very difficult for younger people who might have a blog about that camera or something that's very interesting, that does give some really good information, to get into that vortex at all. Nobody even knows the work. So then you have to go look, do I run ads on Facebook? Do I do this? It's very difficult because you're dealing with machines that are curating the content. In the old days, you get a newspaper on your doorstep, pre-internet, or you'd look at the news. Well, there was a whole team of people that were coming up with what they felt was the most important, and the most relevant, and so they got it right a little more often.
To aim this back, those cases of, let's say something wasn't like, they weren't solid on it. You can't just go and hit publish. You have a review of people that go up and like, maybe we should do a little bit more research on this. Yeah. And that doesn't happen anymore. And that leads back to what I said about the real, quote unquote, again, I'm doing air quotes, journalism sources in our industry are gone. That you lose that chain where you get more than just someone else, your own input into something. And there are benefits to not having that chain. You can go faster. You can make content that's more tailored to what you personally believe.
It can be of the moment.
Exactly. It can be, And so That's the advantage. The disadvantage is you run into the issue where maybe you're not right. And I need to stress this really, really strongly. It's okay to be wrong. It's really okay. I'm wrong so much. I'm wrong a lot. And I think that helps me grow as a journalist. Now, I actually consider myself a journalist. And now I'm younger than you, Ted, but I consider myself part of the old guard because I came from journalism.
Well, that's what you studied. Yeah, right.
I still write for a site that is from like the 90s that is still journalism. We still do the research. I mean, that's why it took us 3.5 weeks, maybe, it may have been even longer than that, to release any review of the Sony a6400, weeks after anyone cared, because we were dedicated to getting the story right. We wanted the correct story. We wanted to test it 3 times. We wanted to get it right. And this is another example, Ted, I think you would agree with this. There were cases where stuff was put out like the night we got that camera.
Dude,
that wasn't
correct.
Let me
tell you how that
was
works.
Not correct.
So this is, and I'm not going to name names because I'm not trying to tear anybody down. The point here is to see this is the monster that's been created by the system I just described on YouTube. Right. This is the monster. So we're at the A6400 event. We go to the Sony HQ for the presentation that they gave us, and then we got the cameras, and we had a little bit of time shooting there. We are on the bus to go to our first shooting location, right? And we're going to spend the day evaluating said camera and understanding how it works and finding how we want to take an angle of whether we like it or not and what we're going to report. Well, because the way YouTube is set up and this dire need to be first when a topic is hot, and that day, because of the rumor sites, so on and so forth, that camera was newsworthy, right? I'm on the bus. I look over. One of my colleagues has already posted his video. I'm like, how? I mean, and this is somebody that I like a lot and I have an enormous amount of respect for. And in fairness, he did he talked about one characteristic of the camera that's a very simple video to make. He's done this with a lot of cameras, and so I don't think his information was bad. And so what he did is he just immediately went out back, did that style of video because it was a small little aspect of the camera, and he later did stuff. But anyway, it's like, seriously, we haven't had the camera in our hands an hour and you've already posted a video. And then I look over and another guy that I have an enormous amount of respect for, he's an incredible colleague. I have nothing but love for the guy. He's over there with his laptop open, editing the video so we can get it posted before we're even done with all the shooting. And it's not their fault.
No, it's not their fault. That's the key here.
No, it is not their fault. That's why I'm keeping the names out.
It's just another symptom of this virus that we're in. Yeah, they're trained to do this in order to be successful. They have to do this. If they don't do this, they don't succeed.
And my immediate reaction is, oh, I must be slacking.
Yeah, I'm doing something wrong.
I'm
the fault.
And we're on a long bus ride, so the guilt is coming in. And so, and then ultimately I didn't do that because I had some time to think about it, and we worked together on a couple of things, and you know. I've also seen another colleague that I have a lot of respect for, like, do a test of a function on the camera set up incorrectly. Yep. No redaction, no removal. And here's the deal. Like you said, mistakes are cool. I will be the first to admit I have made a lot of them. They're everything from little tiny things, like I did a bio video on Ansel Adams years ago, and I say off the cuff in the video I have the year he died wrong, off by 2 years or something. Okay, and people call me out in the comments and they, you didn't check anything. Well, no, I'm doing a video. I'm speaking off the cuff. And so I kind of let that go, corrected it in the notes in there. There has been several instances where I finished a video, looked at it, and before I uploaded it and hit post, I was just like, no. I can't. It's too
much wrong information.
Too much, exactly. And so I've held it. There's been maybe 1 or 2 instances where I've actually removed a video because of that same thing. I did it's a different reason, but that interview that I did with Neil last year, I pulled down at his request. And so there's certain times where I don't know. It's like I think it does more harm than good to leave things up or proceed when you don't have your information accurate just in the name of staying relevant in your career. And that's hard.
And building on top of that is once you have a name, let's say you're a big deal.
Yeah.
And you make a mistake.
And you make 300 videos a year.
That mistake is then defended by the people who put you up on a pedestal of knowledge, even if they can't vet that for you. So then now what you've done is you've created a false statement or a false belief, and it will then be believed because of who you are. And that's problematic if you don't personally take in that responsibility. That's a lot of responsibility. There are thousands of real people who will then create an idea because of what you said. And if you say something wrong and you don't admit to saying something wrong, you are helping push fake news.
We're going to avoid the term, but yeah.
I hate saying it. Yeah.
Sure. Well, but you know,
it's not real.
It comes back to, I mean, you hear people say this all the time. Yes, in the United States, we have a Bill of Rights. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects that, which is freedom of speech. Now, that does not mean that you can, the classic example, you can't run into a movie theater and yell fire. That's not freedom of speech.
Right.
I think that the problem is then it requires an interpretation of what that means. And it does. I don't know if I do it great. I'm not the biggest channel on YouTube, obviously. I do okay. I do treat the content that I do with that, or try to. I realize that I have a responsibility, and I'm not trying to say that you know, my poop don't stink, supposedly, but it's and I don't always get it right either. But I think the reason that we're having this conversation is that, and it's not just YouTube channels. We're picking on that right now, but it's a lot of the media that surrounds our niche as photographers that doesn't get things right, and they don't have that standard.
Yeah,
that
they've never been held to it, and they never agreed to it.
It's just be responsible, you know.
So, like, I guess what I want anyone who watches or listens to this to come away with is, in this era of new media, all the information that is presented to you, you are equally burdened with vetting the truth of that information as the people who present it, because you can't necessarily trust the presenters anymore unless you go to a place that has been known for a very long time of getting it right, who goes back and says, we're sorry, we made mistakes, and who corrects. Even then, don't necessarily believe it unless you check the sourcing. Check sources. Remember where it's coming from. Look at link. Don't just read titles. That's another problem. Just reading titles is enough to mess you up. Like, you have to actually put effort in. I know this is so hard to hear because putting effort into anything really sucks. But you have to put effort into this in order to...
Let's just put it this way. If you're reading a story that something is fishy with, then the redaction hasn't been made because the story... You know what I mean? It's like, you're not going to see the redaction. You can't take it at face value at that point. You'll see it 2 days later when it's, you know...
So I guess this sucks, but like, don't necessarily listen to us. Don't trust us every time. Check our source. Vet other people who have talked about the same subject. Watch the same stuff from other people. Make sure that you're getting the full story. Just hearing the words from one person, especially the more inflammatory they are, the more skeptical you should be before getting out those pitchforks and torches. Like, these days it's so easy to be a keyboard warrior because you're in your own little vacuum. Just like when we create our videos, we're doing it in our own vacuum. It can be, that's where mistakes are made because we don't have a chain to put them up. Those same mistakes, that same issue falls upon you as the recipient of that media. And it's just a really challenging time when there's so much not true that can't be called not true because of the rage that builds around it. And once that tidal wave gets going, it's really challenging to stop. The last thing I want to mention about the peer review thing, because we kind of like dangled off it, is because there's not a lot of response for doing a peer review, you don't get the same love that you get for either proving, because the risk you're taking is you'll prove the peer review correct, and then there's definitely no, okay, well, that guy said it first. But if you prove the peer review wrong, nobody cares anymore because it's gone, because the next topic has already come up. And I said this to Ted before, a lot of YouTube channels that are good at controversy are like a guy in a car with a truck full of Molotov cocktails, and they're just chucking them out the windows, burning down different buildings because of the controversy. And so while other people who are trying to get in there and be like, well, hold on a minute, we need to like double check on this, they're over there putting a fire out on the first building, and the car with the Molotov cocktails is already a block down the road with 6 other burned buildings behind it. Like, it is just too much work to keep up with that, and there's almost no value in it in terms of like monetarily or press-wise or getting any of those. The follow-ups are never as good as the original, especially when it's such a highly inflammatory concept or conversation. And so it's really hard for anyone to want to go in there and correct wrongs unless the person who's throwing those Molotovs wants to stop and help put the fire out once in a while. I get really emotional about this because I know how much work it is to do a good story. I know how much work it is to be a person who cares about that sort of thing. And then when I watch it not happen with someone who really should have taken those steps, and watch the response of the people that believe in those folks, it hurts. It like physically hurts my chest. Like it's like, you know, that feeling of when you're told that the person that you love doesn't love you back. It just hurts. That's what it does to me, and it's physically painful. And that's why I felt like we needed to make this, Ted. Is I needed to at least say it. If I don't say it, then what am I doing? I'm just bottling it up and pretending problems don't exist.
I agree with you completely, and a lot of it, the problem that I'm hearing is this is the modern world we live in with this stuff, and I called it the monster a minute ago. Is that, you know, it's this short cycle that has to be, you know, race through. Everything has to be quick, and what it does is it starts lowering the quality. And I think you said the key words. You know what time it takes to do this. When I did, I'll share something with some folks that really put me down a dark path. And you know, I do the artist series. I still do it, where I do about 5 a year. Interviews with living photographers. People just see the end result. They're just sort of these documentaries. Maybe they've heard of them, maybe they haven't. Those are hard to do. The first time I did them, I did a crowdfunding thing. And even then, I not only used all that money up, I matched it with my own finances going into it. So it's expensive to do. So I have a lot invested with it. The other part of the problem is those are not hip and trendy. They take forever to make. They are the labor of love that you're talking about. And when I released the first season, I almost quit YouTube. I mean, I was ready to delete my entire channel. And the reason is because they just flopped. Nobody was interested. They performed poor. I mean, the artists that I worked with enjoyed them, and I made a lot of, you know, but it just like, I felt like in some ways that first round, all of them were the best work that I had done with video as a medium in telling a story, because I got into this. I never wanted to be called a journalist. That's a tag that's been thrown on me recently. I got on YouTube because I'm just a nerd who loves photography. I love sharing it. I'm fairly good at teaching. And so it was a really nice outlet for me my goal was it still is, to share my enthusiasm for the subject with others, like-minded people. Right. And here I had felt like I had done that, and it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is it didn't play into the stratosphere that is topical content of the moment, things that are hip and trendy, you know, so on and so forth. And it guts me when people will leave comments in those videos is, you should just do these. And it's like, I know you're complimenting me, but I can't just do those. I will be dead in the water. There's no physical way I could just do those. I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate the compliment. And so now we're looking at the twist of that. I do a lot of videos on photography. I review cameras. I mean, we do everything that's of the moment. But even those things, you know, if you're not putting the time in, you're getting things wrong. And we know the time it takes to do that right. And we're forced now into this thing where there's just so much competition that you don't have a choice but to pump up garbage, you know? That's a strong way of summarizing all that, and I don't mean to call other people's content garbage. It's not, but and I probably took it too personally, you know? And I didn't quit YouTube, and I still make those. And
you didn't?
No, did not quit YouTube. Seriously, I really almost did. And I've never said that on the channel before because I don't want to have this, oh, woe is me, you know. And that's the hard thing about this whole discussion at all, because it's so hip and cool on YouTube to pick these like 90s gangster rap fights with other YouTube channels. Yo, you said, and West Coast, East Coast starts up. You know, that's stupid. And I don't want this to appear that we're doing that, because we're not. Mm-hmm. It's just a general call to our industry to say we are better than that. And I put myself on that line too. I need to be better than that. I need to make better content. I need to constantly be pushing myself. Like I told you, I never wanted to be called a journalist. The only people who started doing that were camera companies when they want to invite you to their event. They're not going to pay you. They want an honest opinion. And I didn't like that term initially, but like it or not, if I'm going to do any kind of reviews on work like that, then guess what? That is journalism, and you're going to have to approach it in that way. And so I don't know, we're kind of talking in circles at this point, and I feel like I did a whole woe is me, and I really didn't mean to do that, but
I hope we've at least gotten the point across that it's important. All of this is important for us as both creators and as consumers of content. that we all have a certain responsibility.
Absolutely.
And we need to take that responsibility seriously. That's it. For me, at least. I mean, I'll sit here and
I'll a long time to come down to that, but that's all it is, right?
I'll personally get angry about certain videos, and I'm okay with being here at home and texting you rapidly about how angry I am. And
I love it, Jaron.
But I don't want to go out there in public and like just shame someone for it. I feel like those who do that, like those who have made the mistakes, it's on them to say I'm sorry. I don't want to force them to say I'm sorry. Then it doesn't feel like a real apology. So I'm not asking for anyone to apologize for anything. I just want everyone to think more about the media that they consume. I know that's asking a hell of a lot.
Yeah,
maybe people to think more.
And it could be that we're just a couple old farts sitting here worried about the good old days when we used to have newspaper and no internet. And maybe that.
Up until last year, I was still getting a physical newspaper to my door.
I think that's cool, man.
I liked it.
Yeah. I have nothing else on this topic. I think
neither.
we pretty much came down to it. I think there's a lot to get off our chest too. I mean, it's.
So sorry if we meandered a bit. Hopefully, we at least provided some sort of interesting topic to listen to throughout it. But we appreciate everyone listening to this or watching it.
That's true. You're watching. And by the way, this is basically a visual version of our podcast. And so, if you want to hear us ramble more about certain topics, they're not always this passionate. Sometimes we're having fun with things. Actually, most of the time we are.
Yeah, we need to have fun on the next one for sure.
We will definitely have fun. So, link in the description where podcasts are listened to. Yeah. And until the next video, we'll see you guys then. Later.